Remember, let us remember. Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God.
I think the Catholic mission of the college, it's harder to articulate how that influences many of us, but I'm encouraged by the fact that we have an institute now, Cummins Institute, where the dialogue is beginning, and we're beginning to invite the community into some kind of celebration of our Catholicity as a way of looking at the sacred quality of life and the sacramental quality of life, of seeking the truth together and of worshiping together and being a community of faith.
Catholicity? You want me to talk about Catholicity? I'm a Jew. After 20 years at St. Mary's, I kind of like teaching at a Catholic school. I felt very alienated at first, but again, like I said, I wasn't into turning down employment. And there are certain ways that teaching at a Catholic school is very helpful to a music teacher. When so much of the history of music has an intersection with the history of Catholicism, I mean, so much of the great music was Catholic, especially in the medieval and Renaissance, especially when you're teaching medieval and Renaissance. I love teaching the Mozart Requiem. It's one of my favorite pieces, and one of the best pieces ever written. And there's a lot of intense theological thinking inside the Requiem, which I never learned about in school. And I got help from, again, Dan Cawthon. He's wonderfully knowledgeable about music, the Catholic tradition, a lot of things. And we communicate comfortably. And he communicates to me, a real amateur and a real infidel, very clearly. But we talked about the Mozart Requiem, and it was a very stimulating conversation to me. I learned the piece far more deeper than I ever could have known it otherwise. And I was far better in class. I mean, I can't imagine teaching it without that sort of coaching, Catholic coaching, really honestly, Catholic coaching.
The Catholic idea is that God is in creation. And therefore, when you know more about creation, you know more about God. When you know more about architecture, you know more about God. When you know more about literature, you know more about God. When you know more about yourself, you know more about God.
If you look at Catholicism, it seems to me that the primary way that affects teaching is through the moral imprint that it leaves on us as teachers, saying we're concerned not just with the intellectual or indeed the intellectual and social development of our students, but with their development as moral human beings who are committed to the ideas of justice and of service to their family and to their God.
Now, I'm not in any way advocating a return to fundamentalism or a right-wing approach to Catholic education. But what I am saying is that if we aren't able to own this religious dimension of our educational process, I think we will be doing the students a disservice.
We have an extra obligation if we choose to teach in a Catholic college. And one of the things we have to be careful is that we don't isolate the texts. I remember once when I signed up to teach a course on the Bible and literature, and the operative commander of the English department said no. He said it was a way of turning the scripture into merely literature. And to say that is to not be imaginative enough to be a teacher. There is so much in the scripture that is poetical and beautiful and that saves people when they're about to die or when they are in some dire situation. They remember They remember Ecclesiastes, for example. What a beautiful poem. Nothing like it. And you will not allow it in the classroom?
Leisure is the basis of culture. It always has been the Protestant view of life that working hard is the most important thing. And it's always been the Catholic view of life that goes back to monasticism, that prayer and contemplation is the highest moment in life. And I really, now that I'm on the verge of complete retirement, I believe that more than anything else. Work is not the highest human activity. And the Catholics have always said to contemplate what is beautiful, good, and true is the highest form of human activity, not having your nose to the proverbial grindstone.
The Catholic tradition calls us to address the student's ultimate concerns. Why are we here? What are our obligations to one another and to ourselves? What is the meaning of our existence? In all of those areas, students do best when they are engaged in intellectual partnerships with the professor.
Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God. Remember, let us remember. Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of. Remember, let us remember. Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God.
I came here and I didn't really know much about LaSalle or the brothers. And over the years, talking with Brother Michael, talking with Brother John here, talking with Ron Gallagher, talking with the Ken Cardwell and the array of brothers I've gotten to know over time, I've been struck by the extent to which I think ideas and values that were dear to me for a lot of reasons are expressed in the notions of LaSalle, and especially in that sense that education isn't strictly something that we do to them. It isn't something that's done in limited time periods in a classroom. It takes 24 hours a day. It's done in community. It's done collectively together with them.
If we talk about the Lasallian part of the St. Mary's mission, that's a part that is open to so many different interpretations from so many different people. Each faculty member that you talk to, each professor has a different take on what that means. For me, it's reflected in very concrete ways in availability, in careful listening to students, in seeking to find out what's going on with them, not just intellectually, but personally, spiritually, in showing them that I care about the whole of their lives, not just their test questions or their term papers.
But it seems to me that in the case of St. LaSalle, represented here by the statue, we don't have simply what he says, but what he does. And I think we need to look at, as it were, the real St. LaSalle, not the metallic one, but the one who is witnessed very well in his own writings and in diverse historical narratives with regard to him. I think it's very important that we do that.
The Lasallian tradition also emphasizes active pedagogy, having the students participate directly, having student-centered activities, task-oriented activities, so that students not only acquire understanding, but are able to connect it to their own lives, to their concerns, their interests, so they see why it's meaningful to them.
I got the Lasallian mission dimension of that from a speech by Brother Luke Salm, and I was very taken with that he was talking to, I forget from my speech, he was talking to a group of lawyers or something associated with the Christian Brothers, and he was talking about salvation and saying salvation also, or maybe primarily, involves human salvation, and he made, I think, a really profound connection of the Lasallian mission having to do with being aware of the society around us, being aware of social injustice, being aware of, I think he said, environmental assaults, and the last thing he concluded with, as I recall, was war. And I really liked the fact that he enumerated that wide array of concerns as part of the Lasallian mission, because it makes me feel very much a part of the Lasallian tradition when I hear that, because that's exactly the way I would like my mission as a teacher to be developing.
This is the propaganda part. I always hear about the three traditions. I hear about it at least twice a week for the 20 years I've taught here. It gets tiring to me, Brother John. When I taught at junior colleges, we didn't have to ask ourselves, do we serve the poor? We knew we did, every class period. And here you ask yourself in some esoteric way about it. So let me say that I think that the Lasallian tradition, I'm not completely cynical. I'm only in part cynical about the rhetoric around those three traditions. I would say that I do truly, sincerely appreciate an institutional support for excellent teaching. And if that is Lasallian, then I support the Lasallian part of our mission.
The Christian Brothers have made a series of very unique and special commitments to these traditions, particularly, of course, the Catholic tradition, but especially the Lasallian tradition. And it has only been, I would say, within the past 5 to 7 years that as a faculty member, I have been challenged to take the Lasallian tradition more seriously and to learn more about it. I'd like to see that continue. In fact, I would like to see that increase so that every faculty member, particularly new faculty members, but older faculty members, just like me, were more steeped, particularly in the Lasallian tradition. And the brothers represent that tradition.
My hope as a teacher is to try to get students to be aware of the social injustices and the environmental depredations and the assault on peace, be aware of war. And I believe that all of those things are part of the Lasallian tradition, and they are things that I foster in my classroom, even as I constantly remember that my role is not to proselytize or get students to think the way I do. And so what I'm hoping to do is set up an environment in the classroom and beyond it where students will start seeing this as their responsibility. And if they begin to do this through anything that I'm able to do, then I believe that I'm operating within the Lasallian tradition in that way.
Faculty discuss often the tension or the challenge of having a pastoral concern for the well-being of the student as an individual, which is a palpable part of a Lasallian school in particular, and at the same time the need and the importance of challenging them to rise above their comfortable notions and their preconceptions. And that can be uncomfortable for a student to have a faculty member challenge something that they have taken for granted. They've never really stopped to think about it. They just sort of assumed it was true, and now they have to step back and re-examine what they thought they knew. It's not an easy thing to bridge the pastoral concern for the well-being of a student in a Lasallian way, and the responsibility, which ultimately comes out of a caring attitude towards the student, to shake them up sometimes.
What I want to stress, though, is that since this is a college, these are older students transitioning very rapidly to adulthood, and I think it's very important that we interpret Lasallianism not as coddling. I think it's very important that part of the Lasallian mission of preparing them for adulthood is to show them that actions have consequences, to show them that missed assignments and absences are their responsibility and do have consequences if they don't make them up, to show them that they have the power to make a difference in the world, but also to show them that it's their power, it's not our power. They've got to decide to become educated. They've got to decide to stay curious. They've got to decide to stay responsible, to be and stay responsible. We can help them, but ultimately that's in their hands. And so part of the way we help them is by holding them to those commitments, responsibilities, and standards. It may not be quite the same lesson that what might be used in a Lasallian student-centered elementary school or high school, but I see it as the next stage in that same progression.
And over the years, there have been fewer Christian brothers, and that saddens me. I was very glad when we had that marvelous period of time when we re-looked at the college and its values and traditions. And we had a renewed commitment to LaSalle and to Catholicism and to liberal arts. And I would only hope that that continues, because it is what distinguishes us that makes us unique and special. And there is no need to lose that or to water it down to make other people comfortable. Our students are very comfortable here, and they come from all kinds of religious traditions. And they come here for that sense that comes from our three great traditions. And so I feel very, very strongly about the importance of the presence and the work and the leadership of the Christian Brothers and the faithfulness to the traditions that the college stands for.
Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God. Remember, let us remember. Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of. Remember, let us remember. Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God.
The liberal arts tradition holds that the intellect of the student must be active and engaged in order to develop the skills of inquiry, discovery, analysis, proof, and persuasion.
For us teachers, what that means is imbuing students with a love of learning, of helping them develop the intellectual habits of mind and skills so that they will continue learning after they leave this place?
I've been trying for 35 years to decide what the most important role of the professor is at St. Mary's College. And clearly, there isn't a most important role. There are many important roles, and I can go off in many different directions. So I think, though, I might just take two basic directions that sort of relate to my talk. And one of them does have to do with the liberal arts tradition, the fostering the growth of understanding with students and fostering their ability to question and to think analytically and to learn how to think critically about their own ideas.
I think this is still primarily a liberal arts college. I think even the business school tries to raise questions of ultimate value, to bring in social justice, to go beyond mere training. So I think the school can make a fair claim to be a liberal arts college. I think it can make a fair claim to be a Catholic college. Remember, the word Catholic with a small c means universal. And I think it can make a fair claim to being a place where there is the universal search for truth.
If you're going to make a difference in the world, you have to start with the freedom of mind to understand the critical thinking. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, was through reading and talking about really rich texts, training your mind in reasoning and critical thinking.
The liberal arts tradition has invited us into not only continuing to grow, which I think all professors and teachers do with their students, but has given us a flexibility and an invitation to explore, or as Joseph Campbell has said, follow your bliss. I don't know how many professors of the year and others, but I was looking at the list the other day and thinking how many of us have changed our research interests and our questions and what we write about and what we think about. And many of us have been not only given permission, but encouraged to do that. So the liberal arts tradition, I think, encourages you to explore other areas than just the areas that you were prepared to study in graduate school.
Liberal arts, I'm a deep believer in liberal arts. I was trained, like most musicians, I was trained like a plumber with incredibly narrow, embarrassingly narrow education. This is the way musicians are generally educated. I took a job here because I was not into turning down full-time employment. And it was a very liberal arts place, and you tend to adapt to the institution you're at. I preferred a conservatory of music. I would have preferred that, or a big music department somewhere, like the places where I went to school. And I was trying to have doing these different things, but it was my job, and then including collegiate seminar. And I mean, I found myself tremendously stretched here, and then you have colleagues at a small atmosphere where you meet many people outside your discipline. I taught at Cal State Hayward for 5 years in their music department. And in my 5 years, I met one person who wasn't in the music department, only because his offices were right next to all of ours. And 5 years, I never met anybody else that wasn't in music. And here so many interesting, stimulating people that are in all kinds of disciplines. It's very stretching. I mean, the whole... And it's very stimulating, and I realized how much I was missing. It also affects my teaching.
Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God. Remember, let us remember. Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of. Remember, let us remember. Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God. We
they are becoming adults, and very rapidly and right before our very eyes. And we may not see them again either after they make that transition into adulthood. College functions ideally as a little space that they can have where they can think hard about what's going on in their lives and what's going on in the lives of others in the world outside. A little moment of reflection. Obviously, we can't seal the other world out here, out of what we're doing, and we don't. And obviously their personal lives are full of all kinds of complications at this time of their lives.
People are afraid that students are too illiterate to be set to reading, and if that's the case, then you start on page 1 and talk about that page, and inevitably, if you do it with as much love as any teacher could throw into it, the students will come to love it too. That's my experience.
One of the things when I think about Americans' view of the past is that this is well known, that we have what historians have called the exceptionalist view, and that is that America is an exceptional country. This sense that we have achieved so much often inhibits us, and I say all of us, students, Americans, whoever, and presidents, from looking critically at the past. What I'm trying to do when I talk about how some Germans, have tried to understand and confront their past, I'm hoping that the St. Mary students will begin to do the same thing in their own situation and with their own society. And sometimes that happens, and other times they seem quite removed, and they seem quite eager to let the Germans master their past, but conclude that perhaps we Americans don't have much to worry about, and we don't have anything comparable to the Nazi past in our past. Therefore, it's sometimes difficult to get students to really start asking how this concept of mastering the past applies to us and them. And it alarms me when young people seem to say, well, we've solved all of the problems of racial inequality, and we now have equal opportunity, and all of those are problems of the past.
We can help our students see with new eyes by encouraging them to appreciate different ways of knowing. They come to us already embedded in a culture of some sort. Unfortunately, I think, that culture tends to be acquisitive and individualistic. It's the world we live in. But an intellectual community needs to be collaborative, and in order to do that, we need to help them make connections.
I have to be honest about that because it was more joyful to teach when I was younger. And I'll tell you why. This is going to sound a little strange. I think it's because of television that it's less joyful. Let me tell you what I mean. Have you ever seen an MTV video? The frame, the visual image is on sometimes for less than a second. And there's this constant bombardment. And if you listen to modern music, it's extremely percussive. It just comes at you. And I find that a lot of students nowadays, it's as if their nervous system has been altered. And to watch a movie like A Man for All Seasons, which is slow and meditative and thoughtful, is very hard. And so it's becoming harder for me to get through to the MTV generation. It's because they want constant bombardment. And it's harder for them to slow down and be quiet and contemplate. So I feel more like a missionary. In my classes, I'm saying to the students, okay, slow it down, be more contemplative, don't demand constant stimulation. So that has been, it's more of a challenge. It's harder. The older I get, the harder it is, because I don't understand hip hop. I don't appreciate MTV videos. And so it's not as easy to enter their mental universe as it used to be.
I belong to a health club, Brother John, and I'm aware when I go there that if anything's going to happen when I go to do what I have entered those premises for, I've got to go up to the weight room and I have to spend 40, 50 minutes working very hard and sweating. And I'm not going to see the results of that today. I may see it 6 months from now. But daily to work out in that weight room and to commit to the process of what it means to become a healthy person. I also know there's a real strong temptation not to do that. There are other things. There's a wonderful sauna there and a whirlpool to go to, and there's a little cafe to go to afterwards, carrot juice, all that goes with that. And it's really possible to walk through the doors of that club and head for the sauna or the whirlpool and come back and have my carrot juice and never go to the weight room at all. I think that students come to St. Mary's, again, wanting to be fit, if that's the right word, academically, want to be buff academically, and they come through and they see our classrooms and they see the professors there in the classroom at the desk ready to go. But it's really easy for them to be distracted by the accessories around. I mean, we are sometimes referred to as the Moraga Country Club. There are a lot of things that a student can do here besides study.
Students are very open to what's happening around them. They have, I think, we all have a natural aptitude to discover and understand what Rachel Carson called the sense of wonder. Unfortunately, much of our education tends to deaden that sense of wonder, the natural joy of learning, our innate curiosity, how things come to be, how things work. So the problem is not that students are unwilling to appreciate their connections to the natural world. The problem is that they've had so few opportunities to develop that connection and to deepen it.
Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God. Remember, let us remember, let us remember that we are in the holy presence of remember, let us remember, remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God.
I think the most important role of a professor is to teach students how to teach themselves. I don't think we really teach. I think we teach people how to teach themselves. And so as a professor, I consider myself to be successful when students think for themselves.
Well, when I think about being a professor at St. Mary's College, and I think about what might be the most important role that I play, it's very hard, first of all, to narrow things down. In a semester, in a week, in the classroom, outside of the classroom, we seem to play so many different roles at different times with our students. We're coaches, we're mentors, we're grading their papers, we're prodding them to think harder, we're doing research and writing, we're talking about them, the students, with our peers as teachers, and about the art of teaching itself. There's so many different hats that we wear in the course of a semester, a week, and even maybe in the course of 1 hour in a classroom, that it's painful to have to choose. But if I had to, I guess I would say that for me, the most important thing is to model for them and to prod them to instill in themselves the habit of lifelong learning.
The most important role of the professor at St. Mary's College for me has never changed. It's always been centered around my students. I think I would say that I'm grateful for the years with my students. That I'm grateful for, that I was blessed enough to find St. Mary's College where I was able to do the work that for me is my love made visible.
One of our challenges as teacher is to meet them in that classroom and to attract them to what happens there. They won't see it immediately, how that's going to be, but as they exercise the muscles of their mind and begin to experience what it means to generate an idea, that will take precedence over the frills that surround them. There are a lot of frills here, and I think one of our jobs, chief jobs as professors around here, is to keep them on target.
The role of the teacher is to teach very well, and you want to transmit information and certain and important concepts, and also at least a certain passion for the subject. You know, it's really very gratifying when you see students actually catch some of your passion.
That's absolutely it. And there is no magic formula that tells you the answer to learning to love learning. Sometimes we have to be terribly intuitive, merely intuitive, in order to figure out what's the next move that will keep this person interested and on the go. And I'd like to suggest what we very seldom say to each other, which is that to teach well is to get the students to enjoy. Aristotle said once that, he probably said it twice too if I know him, that there is no learning without pleasure. And it seems to me that our job then, our main job to which everything else in the college should bend, is to figure out how to please the students and get them through happily so that they carry it with them, the greatness of the text that we teach.
I've thought about that a little bit recently for various reasons. And one thing that occurs to me, first of all, is I have really come to believe that no one professor can do it all. That each of us has to do what's most important for us. And none of us is going to touch all students in all the ways that are the best. I don't think that every professor has every answer. I don't think any of us, even the greatest minds, have the complete perspective on things.
I think the most important role of the professor at St. Mary's College is not what he expressly professes, but what he or she is. I think the sense of role then it needs to be clarified, that this is not a role that one takes on and plays. That's the worst thing of all to do. It seems to me that you must simply be yourself, but that means to be forgetting who you are.
As professors and staff, we have a community that we're building together and a responsibility for one another's well-being and health. We also have a wonderful opportunity to have a different type of relationship with students. In my former life, the relationship with students was rather demarcated by professional relationship and personal relationship, and you didn't cross the boundary. And when I came to St. Mary's, there was a call to be more authentic, more oneself, and to be more of a facilitator and a guide than a master teacher or a professor who stays apart. And I think that's a very special meaning of being a professor at St. Mary's, or can be.
Simply having people together, face to face, together with their colleagues and their students in a community, seems to me a very critical part of the kind of creating the kind of atmosphere wherein students grow and develop morally, socially, and intellectually with professors as their guides, their models, and sometimes just their friends.
As professors, I think we would be shortchanging our students as the kind of role models that we need to be if we saw ourselves as limited to that 1 hour in the classroom. If our own lives were focused entirely around that 1 hour in the classroom, I think we need to model for them that we are keeping up that conversation beyond the hour with adults, inside our discipline, inside our communities, that we are trying to make a difference in the world out there, that we're not some sort of monks that are, preserving the great books of Western civilization for generations hence. We think those books, as well as the study of history, have a lot to tell us about right now, and they have a lot to do to inform us about our own lives. And so it's very important, I think, for us to model that we're still learning, we're still conversing with other adults at the highest levels of our own discipline, if that's possible, with other teachers about the craft of teaching, and that we're active in our communities, be that even if it's a letter to the editor or lectures before community groups, volunteering on weekends, whatever form it may take. I think it's very important for professors to show students that we're engaged out there, that the so-called boundary between the classroom and the real world is an artificial one, that in the end, it's a very porous boundary, and adulthood is not the transition from the classroom to the real world. Adulthood is the interpenetration of learning with acting out there in the real world.
Remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God. Remember, let us remember, that we are in the holy presence of. Remember, let us remember, we are in the holy. Let us remember, presence of God, presence of God.
It's one thing to have a career as a teacher. It's another thing to have a vocation as a teacher. I think a vocation, as you know, the word itself, vocation, comes from the Latin to call, and that this inner calling is what's motivating the teacher to move into these classrooms, and that the students that come to us are sent to us by God. We see that, and we know we're responding to that call as we interact with those students in that classroom. That's much different than following a career path.
I've been at St. Mary's since 1981, so I'm starting to get a hang of the place. And what I do tell new faculty is that they find some way of connecting what they care about, what excites them, with the larger intellectual life of the college. When that happens, people find themselves very satisfied with their students, their colleagues, and the work that they do. If they don't, if they come here, teach their students, and then use this as a base to go off and do whatever it is they really care about, they find it very unsatisfying.
Every single new faculty member needs to spend, I would say, at least the first 3 to 5 years that they are here carefully studying and learning the culture of the college. Because when you do, then the respect that you have for this institution grows. It's not an easy feat to distinguish yourself as a liberal arts, private Catholic college steeped in the Lasallian tradition. It's not an easy feat to hold fast to values in a world of changing and challenged values, and not to learn the culture that makes those events, those truths, real and stable. To me, it's very simple. Then you don't belong here.
It seems to me that if we look upon the statue of Saint LaSalle as holding out something like a entrance requirement for the college, it seems to me that it, like Plato's injunction, needs to be taken on many levels. Similarly, it seems to me that with regard to Saint LaSalle's injunction, God is present in the things around us, say simply in the natural scene, but God is also then present both in the subject matter and also in the occasion, the life of our class discussions and say in conferences and in writing papers. God is present further, though, in prayer, to which all of this finally directs.
I think mutuality of teacher and student is certainly increased by sitting in the office, preferably with the phone turned off. The office is a better place than the classroom because it's a more informal place where friendly exchanges can take place before you ever start to talk about ideas, books, and all those important things that the student may have come in for.
I've been at St. Mary's College for 16 years. And probably the most important invitation I had was from a Christian brother, Brother John O'Neill, in fact, to enter into teaching with new eyes. And the new eyes are, you have the students you have, you meet them where they are, you take them forward. You don't think about the students you don't have. I think about the fact that they really are coming to an institution that has not only an obligation, but a privilege to serve a diverse population of students. And in doing so, they really need to think about where the students are and take them forward, not the deficit model of what they don't have when they come. I also want them to know that they have support and that they're entering a community that values community. And a number of universities and colleges don't have that ethos, don't have that value, and it's much more competitive. And so I like to invite new faculty into a community that values this kind of support of one another, and to tell them that they not only have that in their department, in their school, but they have it college-wide.
I think we have to continually to talk to each other about it. We have to keep in mind that that is a very important element of what being at St. Mary's means, and we have to do everything we can to remind all of us, ourselves, our administrative colleagues, our staff colleagues, that we're not separate groups.
I'm mentoring a new faculty member now, and my responsibility as a senior faculty member is to make sure that I do everything that I can to support her and guide her and mentor her and help her. And that's something that I take very seriously, as do my other colleagues. So that the last thing that I would say is that it's very important that new faculty seek out the help and the support that they need, because it is here. and faculty members like myself welcome the opportunity to be involved in their life here at the college.
And it's very important to model, seems to me, to students the idea that they continue to be engaged or get engaged in the civic life of their communities. We are preparing them, especially in history classes, it seems to me, we're preparing them for citizenship. We're not preparing them necessarily for careers. We're not preparing them to be taxpayers. Hate that word. We're preparing them to be citizens. And as citizens in this precious, democracy that we have, they've got a responsibility to be curious about their nation's past, its place in the world, and then to act on what they learn.
When I think about how much I thought I knew after I earned my doctorate, how much more I know now, and how much more I still want to know, it's like, it's almost it's embarrassing. And but the only way to be a good prof, in my opinion, is to continually be learning. But if you think I already learned my information, I earned my degrees, I got it, and now I'm conveying it to students, it's a one-way thing. I think you're going to be boring as a teacher, and I think you're going to be boring as a person.
If I was to tell a new teacher how to perhaps become a good teacher, it would be have confidence in your beliefs, be passionate about your beliefs, but don't force them on other people. I think there's a huge, crucial, significant difference between indoctrinating, telling people what to believe, and encouraging them to develop their own beliefs.
Sometimes I'm a little frustrated with it, especially when I feel that I see my students, to my light, missing the point. If you're going to make a difference in the world, you have to start with the freedom of mind to understand the critical thinking, the ability to swallow hard truths. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, was through reading and talking about really rich texts, training your mind in reasoning and critical thinking. But I do have my moments of doubt about that, especially as I track some of my former students and see that maybe they didn't learn those lessons so well.
It certainly gives me pleasure when I try to think that I've been a part of the process of helping students to begin to ask new questions and really begin to see their responsibilities in a way that they hadn't done before. Yes, when that happens, it gives me a lot of pleasure. Now, one of the things that every teacher knows is you don't know when it's happening, and a student may come back to you 5 years or 10 years later and all of a sudden and say, do you know what that meant? And this was the student who sat in the back of the class, or you didn't know. You have to sort of sense that there's an atmosphere in a class that you have helped to cultivate and promote. And yes, when that atmosphere is there, it does give a great deal of pleasure.
Here you have the opportunity to teach students at various levels. This past semester, I taught freshman cohort students and worked with them, as you know, not just in their academics, but in other aspects of their life here. All right. I also taught with colleagues a beginning course in the secondary teaching credential program, preparing teachers. These are graduate students, many of them young, some of them older. But I also work with students in a doctoral program. So I got to work with students at all levels, and I loved it. It's wonderful. It was wonderful.
The San Francisco District of the Christian Brothers has been particularly attentive to the formation of their partners and colleagues. This district has hosted the Lasallian Leadership Institute and the Buttermer Institute for Lasallian Studies. And there have been a good number of people from St. Mary's College who are participating in or have participated in these programs. And I think then we become the leaven in the community to raise the awareness about what does it mean to have a Lasallian charism in this campus community.
Remember, we are in the holy land. presence of God. Remember, let us remember